The sky darkened to a menacing purple-black as Lillian Vance stared out the window of her stepmother's modest clapboard house, watching the swirling clouds gather with a growing sense of dread. The storm brewing over Beaver, Utah in the spring of 1875 promised to be the worst the territory had seen in years, but the tempest outside was nothing compared to the one raging within the four walls she reluctantly called home. "You worthless, ungrateful girl." Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a whip as she hurled Lillian's meager belongings into a worn canvas sack. "I've had enough of your father's daughter eating my food and wearing clothes I paid for." Lillian flinched, her fingers gripping the windowsill. "Please, it's going to storm." "Father has only been gone 3 months and left me with nothing but debts and you," Eleanor spat, her face contorted with rage. "I've found a new husband who doesn't want another man's daughter in his house. You're 19 now, old enough to make your own way." Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it rattled the dishes in the cupboard. Lillian turned from the window, her heart pounding against her ribs. "You can't mean to put me out in this weather. Where would I go?" "That's hardly my concern, is it?" Eleanor thrust the sack into Lillian's trembling hands. "Perhaps if you'd been more agreeable about working for the Hendersons, you'd have somewhere to go, but you just had to refuse Mr. Henderson's attentions." Lillian's cheeks burned with indignation. "He tried to force himself on me. I won't apologize for defending myself." Eleanor's hand struck Lillian's cheek with such force that she stumbled backward. "Get out, now, before I call the sheriff and tell him you stole from me." Tears sprang to Lillian's eyes, not from the slap but from the cruel injustice of it all. Her father had loved this woman, had married her when Lillian was just 14 after her mother died. How could he have been so blind? "I'll go," Lillian said quietly, dignity straightening her spine despite the fear coursing through her veins. She pulled her shawl tightly around her shoulders, tucked the pathetic sack of belongings under her arm, and walked toward the door. The first drops of rain began to fall as Lillian stepped onto the porch. By the time she reached the road, the heavens had opened, unleashing a torrent that instantly soaked through her thin cotton dress and woolen shawl. The wind howled around her, driving the rain sideways with stinging force. Lillian had no plan, no destination. The Hendersons were out of the question. The church. Reverend Simmons and his wife were too close to Eleanor. They'd only bring her back or worse, believe whatever lies Eleanor told about her. She trudged forward, her boots sinking into the rapidly forming mud. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the road ahead for a brief, terrifying moment before plunging her back into near darkness. The next town was 10 miles away, an impossible journey on foot in this weather. An hour into her desperate march, Lillian could no longer feel her fingers or toes. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, and her soaked dress hung like lead weights from her shoulders. Another flash of lightning revealed a fork in the road. The left path led deeper into the wilderness, the right continued toward the next town. A wooden signpost stood at the junction, but the rain was too heavy for her to make out the words. Lillian chose the right fork, praying it would lead her somewhere, anywhere with shelter. But as she rounded a bend, her foot slipped in the mud, and she tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling through brush and rocks before landing with a splash in a swollen creek. The frigid water stole her breath. Lillian flailed desperately, her sodden clothes dragging her down as the current pushed her along. Her fingers clawed at roots and rocks, finally finding purchase on a low-hanging branch. With the last of her strength, she pulled herself to the muddy bank and collapsed, her consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. Through the rain and encroaching darkness, she thought she heard hoofbeats. A hallucination. Surely her mind's final comfort before the cold claimed her completely. Yates Edwards pulled his hat lower against the driving rain, cursing his decision to check his fence line despite the threatening weather. The storm had worsened faster than anyone could have predicted, transforming the usually docile landscape into a treacherous quagmire. His horse, Dusty, plodded forward reluctantly, sharing his master's misery. "Just a bit farther, boy," Yates murmured, patting the horse's wet neck. "Then home to a dry stall for you and a fire for me." Lightning flashed, and Dusty reared suddenly, nearly unseating Yates. When the horse settled, Yates peered through the curtain of rain, trying to discern what had spooked his normally steady mount. Another flash revealed someone sprawled on the creek bank 20 yards ahead. "Whoa, easy," Yates commanded, dismounting carefully. He approached the figure cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. These were uncertain times, even in a relatively peaceful territory like Utah. But as he drew closer, he saw it was a woman, lying motionless in the mud. Her dress clung to her slender frame, her dark hair plastered across a pale face. For a terrible moment, Yates thought he'd found a corpse. Then she moved, the slightest turn of her head, and relief flooded through him. He knelt beside her, gently brushing the hair from her face. She was young, perhaps 19 or 20, with delicate features now blue-tinged with cold. "Miss, can you hear me?" he called over the storm's roar. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes of a startling deep green. "Help," she whispered, the word barely audible. Without hesitation, Yates shrugged out of his heavy oilskin coat and wrapped it around her. "I've got you," he said, lifting her as carefully as possible. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, fragile as a bird with broken wings. Dusty snorted nervously as Yates approached with his burden. "It's all right, boy," he soothed, somehow managing to mount while cradling the semi-conscious woman. He settled her across his lap, securing her with one arm while gripping the reins with the other. "Hold on," he urged her, uncertain if she could even hear him. "My ranch is close. Just hold on." The ride back seemed interminable. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling incoherently, sometimes frighteningly still. Yates had never been more grateful to see the lights of his ranch house flickering through the trees. "Martha," he shouted as he approached the house. "Martha, come quickly." The door flew open, and his housekeeper's sturdy figure appeared, silhouetted against the warm light from within. Her eyes widened at the sight of her employer carrying a half-drowned woman. "Lord have mercy," Martha exclaimed, hastening to hold the door wider. "What in heaven's name found her by Cottonwood Creek?" Yates explained tersely, carrying his burden inside. "She's freezing. Need to get her warm." Martha's competent hands were already checking the woman's pulse. "She's alive, but barely. Get her to the guest room. I'll heat water and find some dry clothes." Yates carried her up the narrow staircase to the small but comfortable guest bedroom. "Will she be all right?" he asked, his voice gruff with concern as Martha entered with an armful of towels and a flannel nightgown. "Out with you now," Martha ordered, shooing him toward the door. "I'll tend to her. Go get yourself dry before you catch your death too." Reluctantly, Yates retreated to his own room to change into dry clothes. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? What was she doing out alone in such a storm? Beaver wasn't so large that he wouldn't recognize a local, and he was certain he'd never seen her before. When he returned to the hallway, Martha was emerging from the guest room, her face grave. "She's warming up, but she's got a fever starting," she reported. "I've dressed her in one of my nightgowns miles too big, poor thing's skin and bones, and put her in bed with hot bricks at her feet. We'll need to keep watch through the night." "I'll sit with her," Yates offered immediately. Martha raised an eyebrow. That wouldn't be proper, Mr. Edwards, and you know it. Yates ran a hand through his damp hair. Martha, there's a girl fighting for her life in there. Propriety be damned. The housekeeper sighed, knowing better than to argue when her employer used that tone. At least let me take the first watch. You're exhausted yourself. I'll wake you if there's any change. Yates reluctantly agreed, but sleep eluded him as he lay in his bed, listening to the storm's continuing fury outside. His thoughts kept returning to the mysterious woman and the circumstances that had led her to that creek bank. One thing was certain: when she woke, if she woke, she would have a great deal of explaining to do. Lillian floated in and out of consciousness, aware only of alternating sensations. Bone deep cold giving way to burning heat, rough hands followed by gentle ones, darkness punctuated by flickering light. Voices drifted to her as if from a great distance, unfamiliar and distorted. When she finally opened her eyes fully, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar windows. She lay in a bed softer than any she'd ever known, covered with a patchwork quilt of blues and greens. The room around her was simple but well-appointed. A pine dresser, a washstand with a porcelain basin, curtains of cream-colored muslin fluttering in a gentle breeze. Panic seized her as memories flooded back Alina's rage, the storm, the fall into the creek. She tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her, weak as a newborn foal's. The door opened, and an older woman entered carrying a tray. She was stout and gray-haired, with kind eyes set in a weathered face. "Well, look who's finally awake," the woman said, her voice warm with relief. "We were beginning to worry, miss." Lillian's throat felt raw, her voice emerging as a croak. "Where am I? Who are you?" "You're at the Double E Ranch, about 7 miles outside of Beaver," the woman explained, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I'm Martha Holloway, housekeeper to Mr. Edwards. And you, young lady, have been fighting a fierce fever for 3 days." "3 days?" Lillian whispered, shocked. Martha nodded, pouring water from a pitcher into a glass. "Mr. Edwards found you half drowned by Cottonwood Creek during that terrible storm. Another hour out there, and we'd be planning your funeral instead of nursing you back to health." She helped Lillian sit up enough to sip the water, which felt like heaven on her parched throat. "Thank you," Lillian managed, "for taking care of me." "Don't thank me yet," Martha replied with a wry smile. "The doctor says you've got the beginnings of pneumonia. You'll be our guest for a while longer, I'm afraid." As if summoned by the mention of illness, Lillian was seized by a violent coughing fit that left her gasping and light-headed. Martha clucked sympathetically, supporting her until the spasm passed. "There now, easy does it. I've brought some broth. Think you can manage a few spoonfuls?" Lillian nodded weakly, allowing the older woman to feed her like a child. The warm broth soothed her raw throat, and the simple kindness of this stranger brought tears to her eyes. "Now then," Martha said when the bowl was half empty, "might we know your name, miss? And perhaps what you were doing out alone in the worst storm we've seen in 5 years." Lillian hesitated. What if they knew Alina? What if they sent her back? As if reading her thoughts, Martha patted her hand. "No need to be afraid, child. Whatever trouble you're in, Mr. Edwards isn't the type to turn away someone in need." Something in the woman's steady gaze convinced Lillian to trust her. "My name is Lillian Vance," she admitted. "My stepmother. She put me out. Said she's remarrying and her new husband doesn't want me around." Martha's expression darkened. "Put you out? In that storm? Why, that's attempted murder, plain and simple." Lillian shook her head, immediately regretting the movement as the room spun. "She didn't care where I went. I've been a burden since my father died." "Nonsense," Martha declared firmly. "No decent person throws a young woman to the wolves, storm or no storm." She stood, straightening her apron with decisive movements. Rest now. Mr. Edwards will want to speak with you when you're stronger." The mention of her rescuer sent a flutter of anxiety through Lillian's chest. "What? What kind of man is Mr. Edwards?" Martha's expression softened. "One of the good ones, miss. A bit rough around the edges, perhaps, but fair and honest to his core. Now rest. That's the best medicine for you right now." As Martha left with the tray, Lillian sank back against the pillows, exhaustion claiming her once more. Her last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude that she'd been found by someone kind rather than someone like Mr. Henderson. Yates was mending tack in the barn when Martha found him. Her expression told him all he needed to know. "She's awake?" he asked, setting aside the leather bridle. Martha nodded. "And talking. Name's Lillian Vance. Poor child's stepmother threw her out in that storm. Can you imagine such cruelty?" Yates's jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his 30 years, especially during the war, but the deliberate abandonment of a young woman in a life-threatening storm struck him as particularly heinous. "Is she well enough for visitors?" he asked, already removing his work gloves. "She's weak as a kitten and that cough worries me, but her mind is clear," Martha replied. "She's afraid, Yates, afraid we'll send her back." The use of his first name didn't escape his notice. Martha only did that when she was truly upset. "No one's sending her anywhere until she's well," he stated firmly. "And not back to that stepmother ever, if I have anything to say about it." Martha studied him with knowing eyes. "Just remember she's in a vulnerable state. Don't go bombarding her with questions." "I'm not completely without tact," Yates protested, though they both knew social graces weren't his strong suit. He took time to wash up and change his shirt before making his way to the guest room. He knocked softly, hearing a feint come in from the other side. The woman Lillian was sitting up against a stack of pillows, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face still pale but no longer with that frightening blue tinge. She watched him enter with wary eyes that reminded him of a cornered deer. "Miss Vance," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm Yates Edwards. Welcome to my home, though I wish the circumstances were happier." "Mr. Edwards," she acknowledged, her voice still rough from coughing. "I owe you my life. Thank you for rescuing me." He moved closer, taking the chair beside her bed. Up close, he could see that her eyes weren't just green but flecked with gold, like sunlight through forest leaves. Despite her illness, there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. A sad smile touched her lips. "We both know that's not true, sir." The simple statement, devoid of self-pity but filled with hard-earned wisdom, touched something in Yates. He'd met plenty of women in his life, flirtatious saloon girls, proper town ladies, hard-working ranch wives, but something about Lillian Vance's direct gaze and quiet strength intrigued him. "Martha tells me you've had a rough time of it," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to know you're welcome here for as long as you need. The doctor says you shouldn't be moved until that cough improves anyway." Relief flooded her features, quickly followed by concern. "I can't impose. Once I'm well enough, I'll find work in town. I'm good with numbers, my father taught me. Perhaps a shop needs help with their books." Yates shook his head. "There's no rush. Winter's coming on and positions are scarce this time of year." He hesitated, then added, "If you're worried about propriety, Martha serves as chaperone." "This is a respectable house, Miss Vance." A blush colored her pale cheeks. "I didn't mean to imply, of course not," he assured her quickly. "But a young woman alone has to be careful of her reputation. I understand that." She studied him, seeming to take his measure. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she relaxed slightly against the pillows. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Edwards," she said. "Martha mentioned this is the Double E Ranch," he nodded, surprised and somewhat pleased by her interest. Edwards' estate, technically, though that sounds grander than it is. My father started with nothing, built it up over 30 years. I inherited it 5 years ago when he passed. I'm sorry for your loss, she said sincerely. Thank you. It was expected he'd been ill for some time. Yates found himself continuing, sharing more than he'd intended. I was away for much of my 20s. Fought for the Union, then drifted for a while after the war. Came home when Father's health began failing. The war changed many men, Lillian observed quietly. That it did, Yates agreed, wondering what personal experience informed her comment. But enough about me. Martha said your father has passed as well, Lillian's expression clouded. 3 months ago, influenza. He was a bookkeeper for the Mercantile in Beaver. Not a wealthy man, but honest and hardworking. Her voice caught. He married Alina, my stepmother, after my mother died 5 years ago. I think he was lonely. And now she's remarrying, Yates asked gently. Lillian nodded. To Mr. Blackburn. He owns the saloon in town. Her distaste was evident. He's been widowed twice already. Something in her tone raised Yates's hackles. Did he ever make you uncomfortable? Her eyes darted away. Let's just say I was glad when Alina forbade him from coming to the house when my father wasn't home. Anger flared in Yates's chest, but he kept his expression neutral. I'm acquainted with Blackburn. Not a man I'd choose to do business with. A coughing fit seized Lillian then, harsh and painful. Yates quickly poured water from the bedside pitcher, supporting her head as she drank. I've tired you, he said with regret. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger. She caught his hand as he rose to leave, her touch feather light. Thank you, Mr. Edwards, not just for saving me, but for being kind. The simple gratitude in her eyes made his chest tighten strangely. Yates, he said impulsively. My friends call me Yates. A smile touched her lips. Then I hope to be counted among them. Yates. He left her room with an odd feeling in his chest. Something he hadn't experienced in a very long time, the stirring of interest in a woman, beyond mere physical attraction. Lillian Vance was an enigma, a curious blend of vulnerability and quiet strength, and Yates found himself wanting to know more about her. The realization was as unsettling as it was unexpected. He'd resigned himself to bachelorhood years ago, convinced that the war had taken something essential from him, the capacity for the tender emotions that made a man a good husband. Yet somehow, this half-drowned girl he'd pulled from a creek had awakened something he'd thought long dead. Fool, he muttered to himself as he descended the stairs. Getting attached to Lillian Vance could only lead to complications. She'd recover, find employment in town or perhaps in a neighboring settlement, and that would be that. Better for both of them if he maintained a polite distance. But even as he made this resolution, Yates knew it wouldn't be that simple. Something about Lillian called to him, like a beacon in a storm, and for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to answer that call. Over the next week, Lillian's health improved gradually. The fever broke, though the cough lingered, harsh and painful. Dr. Patterson visited twice, pronouncing her on the mend but still insisting on bed rest. Young lady, you nearly died, he told her bluntly when she protested the confinement. Another week won't kill you, but getting up too soon might. Lillian reluctantly complied, though inactivity had never suited her temperament. To combat boredom, Martha brought her mending and knitting, and Yates surprised her with books from his modest library. Father loved Dickens, Lillian said with delight, running her fingers over a leather-bound copy of Great Expectations. We read this together when I was 16. Yates watched her from the doorway, fascinated by the animation that transformed her face when she spoke of her father or encountered something that pleased her. In those moments, Illness and worry fell away, revealing a vibrant young woman with a quick mind and genuine warmth. My mother was the reader in our family, he shared, entering the room fully. Father preferred practical matters, animal husbandry, crop rotation, that sort of thing. But Mother insisted I know Shakespeare and Wordsworth alongside breeding records and rainfall patterns. Lillian's smile held a hint of mischief. And which did you prefer? The rainfall patterns, he admitted with a rueful grin. Though I've come to appreciate Mother's favorites more as I've gotten older. These quiet conversations became the highlight of Yates's days. He found himself arranging his work to allow for afternoon visits to Lillian's room, where they would discuss books, share childhood memories, or simply enjoy comfortable silence while she sewed and he reviewed his ledgers. One afternoon, 10 days after her rescue, Yates arrived to find Lillian dressed in one of Martha's altered gowns, sitting in the chair by the window instead of in bed. "Dr. Patterson says I can move about the house now," she explained before he could object. "Though I'm still banished from the outdoors for another week at least." Yates leaned against the doorframe, studying her. Color had returned to her cheeks, and though still slender, she no longer looked frighteningly fragile. The borrowed dress, a simple blue calico, complemented her dark hair and fair skin. "You look well," he said simply, then added with a smile, "though I imagine you're going stir-crazy by now." Lillian laughed, the sound brightening the room like sunshine. "Is it that obvious? I've never been good at sitting still. Father used to say I had ants in my shoes." "In that case," Yates offered, "would you like to join me for dinner downstairs tonight? Martha's threatening to make her famous pot roast, and it's best enjoyed at a proper table." "I'd like that very much," Lillian agreed, her eyes sparkling with pleasure at the prospect of a change of scenery. That evening marked a turning point. Lillian, dressed in the blue calico with her hair neatly braided and pinned, joined Yates in the dining room. Martha had outdone herself, setting the table with Yates's mother's good china, and adding a small vase of late-blooming wildflowers as a centerpiece. Yates found himself uncharacteristically nervous as he helped Lillian into her chair. Having her in his home had begun to feel natural, but seeing her at his table, illuminated by candlelight, gave the situation a different dimension entirely. "This is lovely," Lillian said, glancing around the room with appreciation. "Your home has such character, Yates. It feels lived in, loved." "My mother's influence," he explained, taking his seat across from her. "She believed a house should be comfortable, not just impressive. She sounds like a wonderful woman." She was. Yates smiled at the memory. Strong, too. She came west as a bride of 19. Lived in a tent while Father built the first cabin, and never complained once or so, he claimed. Martha served the pot roast with vegetables from the garden and fresh baked bread. Lillian ate with evident enjoyment, though her appetite was still recovering. "This is delicious, Martha," she praised. "I haven't had pot roast this tender since before my mother passed." "Secrets in the slow cooking," Martha replied with satisfaction, "and a splash of something Mr. Edwards doesn't need to know about." Yates raised an eyebrow. "I've suspected for years you raid my whiskey cabinet for your cooking." "And you've never complained about the results," Martha retorted, retreating to the kitchen with a triumphant smile. Lillian laughed, the sound making Yates's heart do a peculiar flip in his chest. How long had it been since genuine female laughter had filled this room? His mother had been gone for 7 years, and he'd never brought any of his occasional female companions home for dinner. After the meal, they moved to the parlor, where a fire crackled cheerfully in the grate. Lillian settled onto the sofa, tucking her feet beneath her in a gesture so naturally feminine it made Yates's throat tighten unexpectedly. "Tell me about your ranch," she invited. Martha mentioned you raise horses as well as cattle. Yates nodded, grateful for the safe topic. My father started with cattle, but I've been building up the horse breeding operation. There's good money in quality stock for the cavalry and for wealthy ranchers looking for something better than the average cow pony. I've always loved horses, Lillian confessed. My mother taught me to ride when I was small. Father couldn't afford to keep a horse after she died, though. Once you're fully recovered, you're welcome to ride any time, Yates offered. I have a gentle mare that would suit you. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from horses to local gossip to books they had both enjoyed. Before either realized it, the mantel clock was striking 10. "Oh," Lillian exclaimed, looking chagrined. "I've kept you up and you have to be up at dawn." Yates shook his head. "I've enjoyed the evening, Lillian. It's been refreshing, having someone to talk with." Their eyes met across the space between them, and something electric passed between them, a recognition of mutual attraction that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Lillian was the first to break the gaze, rising somewhat unsteadily to her feet. "I should retire. Thank you for a lovely evening." Yates stood quickly, moving to her side. "Allow me to escort you upstairs. You're still recovering." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. The simple contact sent warmth spiraling through him. At her door, Lillian paused, looking up at him with those extraordinary green-gold eyes. "Yates," she said softly, "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Without thinking, he reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against the softness of her cheek. "There's nothing to repay, Lillian." For a breathless moment, he thought he might kiss her, wanted to kiss her with an intensity that surprised him. But propriety and respect held him back. She was still his guest, still vulnerable, still dependent on his hospitality. "Good night," he said instead, dropping his hand and stepping back. "Sleep well." "Good night, Yates," she replied, her voice a whisper that followed him down the hall to his own lonely room. As October gave way to November, Lillian's health returned in full. The cough disappeared, her strength returned, and with it came an increasing awareness that she needed to make decisions about her future. Her presence at the Double E had settled into a comfortable routine. She helped Martha with household tasks, took over the mending that the housekeeper's arthritic hands found difficult, and even began assisting Yates with the ranch's bookkeeping. "You have a real head for figures," he commented one evening as they sat at his desk, reviewing the monthly accounts. "Better than mine, if I'm honest." Lillian smiled, pleased by the compliment. "Father taught me. He said women should understand money matters as well as men do." "A progressive thinker, your father." "He was," Lillian agreed, a familiar sadness touching her features. "He would have hated what a leaner did. He truly believed she would care for me if anything happened to him." Yates covered her hand with his, a gesture that had become increasingly common between them. Some people hide their true nature well, especially when there's something to be gained. The warmth of his touch sent pleasant shivers up Lillian's arm. These moments of connection had been happening more frequently, a brush of hands passing the salt at dinner, his steadying grip on her elbow when they walked in the garden, the way his fingers lingered when he helped her mount Daisy, the gentle mare he'd chosen for her to ride. Each touch, each shared glance, each private smile added another thread to the complex tapestry of emotions weaving between them. Neither had spoken of these feelings, but Lillian knew they were real and increasingly impossible to ignore. "I should consider finding employment soon," she said reluctantly, withdrawing her hand from his. "I can't impose on your hospitality forever." A shadow crossed Yates's face. "You're not imposing, Lillian. Your help with the accounts alone has been worth your keep." Nevertheless, she persisted, I need to make my own way. Perhaps there's a position in town, there's a position right here, Yates interrupted, his voice suddenly intense. Stay on as my bookkeeper. I'll pay you a fair wage, provide room and board. Lillian's heart quickened. People would talk, Yates. A single woman living in a bachelor's home, even with Martha as chaperone. Let them talk, he said dismissively, then sighed at her expression. But you're right, of course. Your reputation matters. They fell into uncomfortable silence, the ledger forgotten between them. Lillian stared at the columns of figures, seeing nothing. She didn't want to leave the double E, didn't want to leave Yates, but what alternative did she have? I could speak to Mrs. Thornton at the general store, Yates offered finally. Her husband mentioned needing help with their accounts. You could work there, find lodging in town. The prospect of leaving the security and warmth of the ranch filled Lillian with dread, but she nodded. That would be kind of you, thank you. 2 days later, Yates rode into town to speak with the Thorntons. Lillian spent the morning in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between practical planning and moments of near despair at the thought of leaving the place that had become home. She was in the garden, gathering the last of the late vegetables before the first hard freeze, when she heard hoofbeats announcing Yates's return. Shading her eyes against the November sun, she watched him ride through the gate, his expression unreadable. Well? She asked as he dismounted, her stomach churning with anxiety. Yates removed his hat, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of frustration. Thornton already hired someone, Blackburn's nephew, apparently. Relief warred with concern in Lillian's heart. Oh. I see. There's more, Yates said grimly. I ran into Alina Blackburn, your stepmother. She was quite vocal about your character when she saw me. Lillian's face burned with humiliation. What did she say? Yates's jaw tightened. Nothing worth repeating. But it's clear she's been spreading tales about you, false ones designed to damage your reputation. So even if there were a position available, Lillian began. No respectable business would hire you, Yates finished, his voice tight with anger. At least not in Beaver. Tears stung Lillian's eyes. She turned away, unwilling to let Yates see her cry. Then I'll have to go somewhere else. Cedar City, perhaps, or even Salt Lake. Lillian, Yates said softly, coming to stand behind her. His hand settled gently on her shoulders. There's another solution. She turned to face him, finding him closer than she expected, his blue eyes intent on hers. What solution? Yates took a deep breath, his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. Marry me. Lillian gasped, certain she'd misheard. What? Marry me, he repeated, his voice stronger now. It solves everything. You can stay at the Double E without concern for propriety. Your stepmother's rumors become meaningless, and I. He hesitated, then finished simply. I care for you, Lillian, more than I thought possible. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure he must hear it. Yates, you can't. Marriage is too serious to propose just to solve a problem. Do you think that's why I'm asking? He looked almost hurt. Lillian, I've been falling in love with you since the moment you opened those extraordinary eyes and looked at me from that sicked. Every day since has only confirmed what I already knew, that you're the woman I want to share my life with. Love. He'd said love. Lillian struggled to breathe, to think clearly through the rush of emotions flooding her. But we've only known each other 6 weeks. A smile touched his lips. My father proposed to my mother after knowing her 2 weeks. They had 37 good years together. This is sudden, she protested weakly, even as her heart sang with unexpected joy. Not to me, Yates said softly. I've known for weeks that I was falling in love with you. I just didn't dare hope you might feel the same. Lillian looked into his earnest face. This man who had saved her life, given her shelter, treated her with nothing but respect and kindness, and gradually stolen her heart with his quiet strength and unexpected tenderness. "I do," she whispered, the admission bringing a sense of rightness that swept away all doubts. "I do feel the same." The smile that transformed Yates's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He took her hands in his, holding them against his chest where she could feel the strong beat of his heart. "Then marry me, Lillian Vance. Not just because it's practical, but because I love you and want to build a life with you." "Yes," she said simply, her own heart too full for elaborate declarations. "Yes, I'll marry you, Yates Edwards." His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, as if she were something precious he feared to break. But when Lillian's arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer, the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find you," he murmured. "Never thought I'd find anyone who made me feel this way." "Nor I," Lillian admitted. "After Father died, I thought I was alone in the world." "Never again," Yates promised, sealing the vow with another kiss. Martha found them there in the garden, still wrapped in each other's arms. Her exclamation of surprise broke them apart, but not before she'd seen enough to guess what had transpired. "Well," the housekeeper said, hands on her hips but a smile playing around her mouth, "I suppose I should be scandalized, but honestly, it's about time." "When's the wedding?" Yates laughed, keeping one arm securely around Lillian's waist. "As soon as Reverend Simmons can arrange it." 2 weeks, Martha decided. "That gives me time to help Miss Lillian prepare a proper trousseau and plan a decent wedding breakfast." As Martha bustled back to the house, already muttering about guest lists and menus, Yates turned to Lillian with an amused expression. "I think we've just lost control of our own wedding." Lillian smiled up at him, happiness bubbling through her like champagne. "I don't mind, as long as at the end of it I'm your wife." "My wife," Yates repeated, wonder in his voice. "Lillian Edwards. It sounds right, doesn't it?" "Perfect," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him once more. News of their engagement spread through Beaver with the speed of a prairie fire. Most reactions were positive. Yates was well respected in the community, and those who knew Lillian from her father's days at the Mercantile remembered her as a polite, hard-working girl. But not all responses were favorable. 3 days after their engagement became public, Yates returned from town with a thunderous expression. "What's happened?" Lillian asked, meeting him at the door, concerned by his obvious anger. "Eleanor and her husband," he spat, removing his hat with more force than necessary. "They were at the general store, telling anyone who would listen that you'd set your cap for me from the beginning, that getting caught in that storm was some elaborate ruse to trap me into marriage." Lillian's cheeks burned with humiliation. "Surely no one believes that." "Some might," Yates admitted grimly. "Blackburn has influence in this town, especially among the men who frequent his saloon." Fresh anxiety gripped Lillian. "Perhaps we should postpone the wedding, wait until this dies down." "Absolutely not," Yates declared, taking her hands in his. "If anything, this makes me more determined to make you my wife as soon as possible. Once we're married, Eleanor's venom can't touch you." His fierce protectiveness warmed Lillian's heart, even as worry lingered. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Yates." "The only trouble would be letting that woman destroy your happiness, our happiness," he insisted. "I won't allow it." The next day brought further complications. Dr. Patterson arrived unexpectedly, his usually jovial face grave. "Thought you should know," he told them over coffee in the parlor. "Blackburn's been asking questions about Lillian's time here, implying impropriety." Yates's hand tightened around his coffee cup. There's been nothing improper. I know that, the doctor assured them. And most folks with sense know it too. But Blackburn's suggesting that your hasty marriage is to cover up, well, a compromising situation. Lillian felt sick. He's implying I'm with child, Dr. Patterson nodded uncomfortably. I've refuted it, of course. Told anyone who asked that I treated you for pneumonia, nothing more, but rumors have a way of persisting. This has gone far enough, Yates said, rising to his feet. I'm going to have a word with Blackburn. Yates, no, Lillian pleaded, catching his arm. Confronting him will only make things worse. She's right, Dr. Patterson agreed. Blackburn's the type to twist any confrontation to his advantage. Yates reluctantly subsided, though Lillian could see the anger still simmering beneath his controlled exterior. After the doctor left, Lillian found Yates in the stables, aggressively grooming his stallion, Thunderbolt. The powerful black horse shifted nervously, picking up on his master's mood. You'll frighten him, Lillian said softly, approaching with caution. Yates paused, brushed mid-stroke, and sighed. I'm sorry, The thought of Blackburn spreading lies about you makes me want to, he broke off, shaking his head. Lillian moved closer, placing a hand on his tense forearm. I understand, but violence won't solve this, Yates. He covered her hand with his. I know, but what will? How do we stop them from poisoning our happiness? Lillian considered the question carefully. Perhaps we need to understand why they're doing this. Eleanor was never particularly fond of me, but this level of malice seems excessive. Guilt, maybe, Yates suggested. She knows what she did was wrong, throwing you out in that storm. Perhaps attacking your character is her way of justifying her actions to herself. Perhaps, Lillian agreed, though she suspected there was more to it. Or maybe there's something else, some reason she particularly doesn't want me to be happy and settled in Beaver. Yates frowned thoughtfully. What could that be? I don't know, Lillian admitted, but I intend to find out. Despite Yates's protective objections, Lillian ventured into town the next day, accompanied by Martha. Her official purpose was to select fabric for her wedding dress, but she had a secondary mission in mind. The general store was busy when they entered, women examining bolts of fabric and men congregating near the back where hardware and tools were sold. Mrs. Thornton, a plump, pleasant woman in her 50s, greeted them warmly. Miss Vance, how lovely to see you up and about. We were all so worried when we heard about your ordeal. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton, Lillian replied with genuine appreciation. Everyone has been very kind. And now a wedding to plan, Mrs. Thornton beamed. Mr. Edwards is a fine man. You're a fortunate young lady. I know, Lillian agreed softly. I thank God every day that he found me. As Martha engaged Mrs. Thornton in a discussion of suitable fabrics, Lillian drifted toward the back of the store. Mr. Thornton was assisting a customer with nails, but his young clerk, presumably Blackburn's nephew, was alone at the accounting desk. The young man looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from polite inquiry to wariness when he recognized her. Can I help you, miss? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I hope so, Lillian replied with a friendly smile. You're new to Thornton's, aren't you? I don't recall seeing you before. Started 2 weeks ago, he confirmed cautiously. Jacob Blackburn. Lillian Vance, she introduced herself, though it was clear he already knew who she was. I understand congratulations are in order. Securing a position with the Thorntons is quite an accomplishment. Jacob shifted uncomfortably. Thank you, miss. You must be good with figures, Lillian continued conversationally. Mr. Thornton is very particular about his bookkeeping. I manage, Jacob muttered, glancing toward the front of the store as if hoping for rescue. Lillian decided to take a more direct approach. Jacob, I won't pretend I don't know that your uncle has been saying, unkind things about me. I'm wondering why." The young man's eyes widened, then darted away guiltily. "I wouldn't know anything about that, miss." "I think you might," Lillian pressed gently. "Is there some reason your uncle and my stepmother are so determined to discredit me?" Jacob's hands fidgeted with a pencil on the desk. "I really can't say, miss." But something in his manner told Lillian he knew more than he was admitting. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Jacob, I've done nothing to deserve the treatment I'm receiving. If you know something that might help me understand, please." The young man's expression wavered between loyalty to his uncle and what appeared to be genuine discomfort with the situation. "It's not my place," he began, then hesitated. "But it might have something to do with your father's will." Lillian frowned. "My father's will? It was very simple. Everything went to Alina." Jacob shook his head slightly. "That's not what Uncle says. He told Aunt Alina there was a clause about you. Something about you getting a portion if you married respectably before turning 21. Shock rippled through Lillian. "That can't be right. I would have known." "Maybe not if they kept it from you," Jacob suggested, then glanced up nervously as the bell over the door jingled. His face paled. "Please don't mention I said anything. Uncle would be furious." Lillian turned to see Alina Blackburn herself entering the store, her husband close behind. Alina's eyes locked with Lillian's across the room, her expression instantly hardening into hostility. "Well," Alina said loudly enough for the entire store to hear, "if it isn't the fortune hunter herself. Planning your wedding, dear. Best hurry before Mr. Edwards comes to his senses." Lillian felt the eyes of every customer turn toward them. Her first instinct was to flee to avoid a scene, but something within her refused to back down this time. "Hello, Alina," she said calmly, moving away from Jacob's desk to face her stepmother directly. "Yes, I am planning my wedding. Yates and I are very happy." Alina's painted lips curved into a cruel smile. "Happy? My dear, he's marrying you out of pity. Everyone knows it." Martha appeared at Lillian's side, bristling with protective indignation. "That's quite enough, Mrs. Blackburn. Come along, Lillian. We've made our selections." But Lillian stood her ground, studying Alina with new understanding. "Is it true, Alina, about my father's will? Was there a provision for me that you've kept hidden?" Alina's momentary flicker of alarm confirmed Jacob's information before she could compose her features. "What nonsense are you talking about? Your father left everything to me, his wife." "I think perhaps I should speak to Judge Wilson about this," Lillian said thoughtfully. "As executor of the will, he would know the truth." "You do that," Alina snapped, but her confidence seemed forced now. "Waste the judge's time with your fantasies. It won't change anything." Blackburn, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. "Come along, Alina. We didn't come here to bandy words with your ungrateful stepdaughter." As they turned away, Lillian called after them. "I was never ungrateful, Alina. I only wanted what my father would have wanted for us to be a family. You're the one who chose differently." Alina paused but didn't turn around, her shoulders stiff as she allowed her husband to usher her toward the fabric counter. Martha squeezed Lillian's arm supportively. "Well done, my dear. But let's get our business finished and return home. I don't like the look in that man's eye." They completed their purchases quickly, selecting a lovely cream-colored satin for Lillian's wedding dress and lace for the veil. As they left the store, Lillian felt lighter somehow, as if confronting Alina had lifted a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged. "Martha," she said as they drove the buggy toward home, "do you think Jacob could be right about the will?" The housekeeper pursed her lips thoughtfully. "It's possible. Your father struck me as a man who would make provisions for his daughter. And it would explain Alina's determination to ruin your reputation. If you can't make a respectable match before you're 21, she keeps everything." I'm 20 in April, Lillian mused. So I'd have just over a year to marry respectably, which is exactly what I'm about to do. No wonder she's desperate to stop the wedding, Martha concluded. Yates was predictably furious when they relayed the events in town and Jacob's revelation about the will. That conniving, greedy, he broke off, pacing the parlor like a caged wolf. We need to speak to Judge Wilson immediately. If they've been concealing your inheritance, Lillian, that's criminal. We need proof first, Lillian cautioned, though her own anger simmered beneath her calm exterior. I can't accuse them based on hearsay from Jacob Blackburn. I'll ride to Cedar City tomorrow, Yates decided. The county records office will have a copy of the will. Judge Wilson's there this week for circuit court. Lillian nodded, relieved to have a plan but anxious about the potential consequences. If it's true Eleanor has been hiding this from me, what does that mean for our wedding? Yates stopped pacing, his expression softening as he knelt before her chair. It changes nothing about us, Lillian. I'm marrying you because I love you, not because of any inheritance. I know that, she assured him, touching his cheek tenderly. But if this causes more trouble with the Blackburns, let it, Yates said firmly. Truth and justice are on our side, and if your father wanted to provide for you, we'll make damn sure his wishes are honored. Yates left for Cedar City at dawn the next day, promising to return by nightfall if possible, though the journey would be challenging to complete in a single day. Lillian spent the morning helping Martha with wedding preparations, trying to focus on their happiness rather than the uncertainty surrounding her father's will. They were working on the design for her wedding dress when they heard the sound of an approaching carriage. That can't be Yates already, Martha said, moving to the window. Her expression darkened. It's your stepmother and her husband. Lillian's stomach clenched with anxiety, but she straightened her shoulders. I'll speak with them. Not alone, you won't, Martha declared, following Lillian to the front door. Eleanor and Blackburn were already on the porch when Lillian opened the door. Eleanor was dressed in an ostentatious burgundy visiting gown, her face set in lines of determination. Lillian, she greeted coldly. We need to speak privately. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of Martha, Lillian replied, keeping her voice steady. Please come in. She led them to the parlor, refusing to be intimidated in what would soon be her own home. Eleanor perched on the edge of the sofa while Blackburn remained standing, his imposing figure seeming to fill the room. I'll be direct, Eleanor said once Martha had grudgingly offered refreshments, which the visitors declined. This charade has gone far enough. Your engagement to Edwards is inappropriate and needs to end. Lillian met her stepmother's gaze without flinching. My engagement is neither a charade nor inappropriate. Yates and I love each other and intend to marry in 10 days' time. Love, Eleanor scoffed. What do you know of love at your age? You're rushing into marriage with a man you barely know because you're desperate and homeless. I know that love includes respect and kindness, Lillian replied evenly. Two things notably absent from your treatment of me. Blackburn stepped forward, his voice deceptively reasonable. Miss Vance, we're concerned for your welfare. Edwards has a reputation as a loner, a man who fought in the war and came back. Changed. He's not husband material. You know nothing about him, Lillian retorted, anger rising despite her determination to remain calm. I know he's been filling your head with nonsense about your father's will, Eleanor cut in sharply. Jacob told us about your conversation yesterday. Lillian's heart sank for Jacob, who would likely face his uncle's wrath, but she kept her expression neutral. If there's nonsense being spread about the will, it didn't originate with Yates. He's gone to Cedar City today to learn the truth from Judge Wilson. Eleanor paled visibly, confirming Lillian's suspicions more effectively than any confession could have done. There's nothing to learn, Alina insisted, though her voice had lost its certainty. And interfering in legal matters you don't understand will only make things worse for you. Is that a threat, Mrs. Blackburn? Martha asked, her tone deceptively mild. Alina shot the housekeeper a venomous look. I'm trying to protect my stepdaughter from making a terrible mistake. By throwing her out in a deadly storm. By spreading vicious rumors about her character. Martha countered, strange protection indeed. That's enough, Blackburn interjected, his face darkening with anger. Alina, we're wasting our time. The girl clearly won't listen to reason. He turned to Lillian, his expression hardening. Break this engagement, Miss Vance. Return to town with us now, and we'll set you up in a small apartment. You'll receive a modest allowance enough to live on if you're careful. The blatant attempt at bribery confirmed everything Lillian had begun to suspect. And in return, I give up any claim to what my father intended for me, she concluded. No, Mr. Blackburn, I won't be bought off or frightened away. Alina rose abruptly. You always were stubborn, just like your father. It will be your undoing. As they moved toward the door, Alina paused, turning back with a calculating expression. You should know, Lillian, that your precious Yates Edwards has secrets of his own. Has he told you how he really spent those years after the war? Why he's so skilled with that pistol he carries? Ask him about Cheyenne. Ask him about the man they called the judge. With that parting shot she swept out, Blackburn following close behind. Martha closed the door firmly behind them, then turned to Lillian with concern. Don't let her poison your mind, child. Whatever she's implying about Yates. I trust him, Lillian said firmly, though Alina's words had planted a seed of unease. If there are things from his past he hasn't shared, I'm sure he has his reasons. But as the day wore on with no sign of Yates, Lillian found herself wondering about those years between the war and his return to the Double E. He'd spoken of them only in the vaguest terms, drifting, he'd called it. What had happened in Cheyenne? Who was the judge? Darkness had fallen when they finally heard the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. Lillian rushed to the door, relief flooding through her at the sight of Yates, dismounting wearily from his exhausted stallion. You've pushed him too hard, she scolded gently, hurrying to help with the saddle. Poor Thunderbolt is ready to drop. Had to get back tonight, Yates replied, his face drawn with fatigue but his eyes bright with purpose. I have the answers we need, Lillian. Once Thunderbolt was settled in his stall with extra oats, they gathered in the kitchen where Martha provided a late supper. Yates devoured the food with the hunger of a man who'd barely stopped to eat all day. Judge Wilson was extremely helpful, he reported between bites. Especially once I explained the situation. He was troubled to hear that you might have been denied your rightful inheritance. Lillian leaned forward eagerly. Then it's true. There was a provision for me, Yates nodded, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket. A substantial one. Your father left the house and half his savings to Alina as his widow. But the other half, nearly $2,000, was to be held in trust for you until you either married respectably or turned 25, whichever came first. $2,000, Martha exclaimed. That's a fortune. Lillian sat back, stunned. I had no idea Father had saved so much. He was prudent with money, Yates explained, and he had a small investment in a silver mine that paid off shortly before his death. Judge Wilson showed me the records. The money is still sitting in the beaver bank, untouched. Because Alina couldn't access it without my marriage or turning 25, Lillian realized. But what about Blackburn? Surely he'd want me married to get his hands on the money through Alina. Yates's expression darkened. That's the interesting part. According to Judge Wilson, Blackburn has been trying to get the trust dissolved, claiming you ran away and abandoned your claim. If he'd succeeded, the money would have reverted to Alina. So they needed me gone, but discredited, Lillian concluded, the pieces falling into place. If I'd died in that storm or left the area in disgrace, they could have made a case that I'd forfeited my inheritance. But instead, you're about to make a respectable marriage, Martha said with satisfaction, and claim what's rightfully yours. Yates reached across the table to take Lillian's hand. Judge Wilson was quite apologetic that you weren't properly informed of the provisions. He assumed Alina had told you, since she was present when the will was read. Lillian shook her head, still processing this revelation. She never said a word, just told me Father had left everything to her and that I was a burden she could no longer afford. There's more, Yates continued. Wilson is riding to Beaver tomorrow to investigate the matter officially. He's bringing a deputy marshal with him. Concealing the terms of a will is a serious offense. A mixture of vindication and sadness washed over Lillian. Alina might face legal consequences for her actions, but that wouldn't bring back the father who had tried so hard to provide for his daughter's future. They came here today, she told Yates quietly. Alina and Blackburn. They tried to bribe me to break our engagement, offered a small apartment and an allowance if I'd return to town with them immediately. Yates's hand tightened around hers. Thank God you refused. Of course I refused, Lillian assured him. But Alina said something concerning about your past. Wariness entered Yates's eyes. What did she say? Lillian hesitated, suddenly uncertain whether she should have mentioned it. She implied you had secrets. She mentioned Cheyenne and someone called the judge. It's not important, it is if it concerns you, Yates interrupted, his expression grave. I should have told you this before, but it's not something I'm proud of. Martha stood abruptly. I think you two need privacy for this conversation. I'll be in my room if you need me. After the housekeeper departed, Yates moved to sit beside Lillian on the bench, still holding her hand but no longer meeting her eyes. After the war, he began slowly, I was lost. Like many veterans, I couldn't settle back into normal life. Everything seemed pointless after what I'd seen, what I'd done. I drifted west, took whatever work I could find, mostly with guns. He paused, gathering his thoughts. In Cheyenne, I worked for a man who called himself Judge Calloway, not a real judge, just a title he gave himself. He ran security for some of the businesses there, which sounds respectable enough, except many of those businesses operated outside the law. You were an enforcer, Lillian said softly, understanding dawning. Yates nodded, shame evident in the set of his shoulders. I never killed anyone who didn't deserve it, at least that's what I told myself. But I became known as someone who handled problems efficiently. They called me the judge's right hand. He finally looked up, meeting Lillian's gaze directly. I'm not that man anymore. When my father's letter came, telling me he was ill, it was like being awakened from a nightmare. I left that life behind, came home, and swore I'd never return to it. Lillian studied his face, the face of the man she loved, searching for signs of the cold enforcer he described. All she saw was the good, honorable man who had saved her life and won her heart. We all have pasts, Yates, she said gently. What matters is who you choose to be now and every day forward. Relief softened his features. You're not repulsed by a man who found his way back from darkness, who built an honest life and treats everyone around him with fairness and respect. Lillian smiled, lifting her free hand to touch his cheek. No, Yates, I'm not repulsed. I'm proud of you. Yates turned his face to press a kiss into her palm, his eyes suspiciously bright. I don't deserve you. Perhaps not, she teased lightly, but you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, pulling her into his arms with a newfound freedom, as if the weight of his secret had been holding him back. I love you, Lillian Vance, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, she whispered against his chest. Past and all. Judge Wilson arrived in Beaver the following day as promised. His meeting with Alina and Blackburn was private, but the results became public knowledge by nightfall. Alina had been removed as trustee of Lillian's inheritance and ordered to appear at a hearing to determine whether criminal charges would be filed. Blackburn, facing financial difficulties of his own, hastily sold his saloon and departed with Alina for parts unknown, fleeing ahead of the scandal and possible prosecution. They left behind a wake of unpaid debts and broken promises, including the position promised to young Jacob Blackburn. "Poor boy," Lillian said when she heard the news. "He's the one who gave me the clue about the will, you know. I hope he doesn't suffer for his uncle's actions." "Perhaps we can help with that," Yates suggested. "I could use an assistant with the horses." "If he's willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." Lillian smiled at her fiancé's generosity. "You're a good man, Yates Edwards." The wedding took place as planned on a crisp November morning with the mountains frosted white in the distance. The entire town turned out, curiosity about the dramatic events of the preceding weeks ensuring a full church. Reverend Simmons, who had initially been hesitant about the hasty marriage, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth after Judge Wilson personally vouched for the couple's integrity. Lillian wore the cream satin dress that Martha had helped her create, with a lace veil that had belonged to Yates's mother. As she walked down the aisle toward her soon-to-be husband, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment from desperate flight in a deadly storm to beloved bride. Yates watched her approach with undisguised adoration, his customary reserve stripped away by the joy of the occasion. When she reached him, he took her hands in his with a gentleness that belied his strength. "You are so beautiful," he whispered for her ears alone. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, spoken with the certainty of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed: love, acceptance, and the promise of a shared future. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Simmons declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The kiss that sealed their union was brief but tender, mindful of the assembled congregation but hinting at the deeper passion they would share in private. The wedding breakfast at the Double E was a joyful affair, with tables set up in the barn cleared for the occasion. Martha had outdone herself with a feast that would be talked about for months, and neighbors had contributed dishes of their own. Jacob Blackburn, who had accepted Yates's offer of employment, helped serve the guests, his young face alight with relief at having found a place despite his uncle's disgrace. As the celebration continued around them, Yates drew Lillian aside to a quiet corner. "Happy, Mrs. Edwards?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she loved. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't believe all that's happened, if you hadn't found me that night. But I did," he reminded her gently. "And now we have a lifetime ahead of us." Lillian smiled up at her husband, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude. A lifetime that began in a storm but will continue in sunshine. "With occasional showers," Yates amended pragmatically. "Life is never all sunshine, Lillian." "I know," she acknowledged. "But the storms don't frighten me anymore, not when I have you to weather them with." He kissed her then, heedless of the guests who might be watching, a kiss that promised passion and partnership in equal measure. "Come," he said when they finally broke apart. "We have guests to attend to, and then—" "And then," Lillian prompted, a blush coloring her cheeks. "And then I get to take my wife home," Yates finished, his voice deepening with promise. Later that night, as they lay entwined in what was now their shared bed, Lillian marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the space of 2 months. From desperate and homeless to cherished and secure, from alone in the world to part of a partnership that promised to grow stronger with each passing day. "What are you thinking?" Yates murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking that some storms bring destruction," Lillian replied softly, "but others wash away what needs to be gone and clear the path for new beginnings." Yates pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Wise words from my beautiful wife. Learned from experience," she said, snuggling against his chest. "And from the man who taught me that after every storm, the sun returns brighter than before." Spring came early to Beaver in 1876, turning the mountains green and filling the meadows with wildflowers. The Double E prospered under the combined care of Yates and Lillian, whose head for figures had already improved the ranch's profitability. Lillian's inheritance, restored to her through Judge Wilson's intervention, had been partly invested in expanding the horse breeding operation and partly set aside for their future children. Jacob Blackburn had proven himself a dedicated worker, showing a particular talent for gentling the more spirited colts. On a warm May morning, Lillian stood on the porch, watching Yates work with a magnificent chestnut stallion in the corral. 6 months of marriage had only deepened their connection, turning initial attraction into a bond that strengthened with each passing day. As she observed her husband's patient, skillful movements, Lillian's hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, where the first stirrings of new life had recently made themselves known. She hadn't told Yates yet, wanting to be certain before sharing news that would change their lives once more. But now, with the doctor's confirmation still fresh in her mind, the time had come. She waited until evening when the day's work was done and they sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Yates," she began, her voice soft with anticipation, "do you remember when you found me in that storm, how you said I weighed almost nothing in your arms?" He smiled at the memory, pulling her closer against his side. "Like rescuing a half-drowned kitten." "Well," Lillian continued, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat abdomen, "in about 7 months I'm going to be considerably heavier." It took a moment for understanding to dawn in Yates's eyes. When it did, the joy that transformed his features was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Lillian," he breathed, his voice choked with emotion. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears. "Dr. Patterson confirmed it this morning. We're having a baby, Yates." He gathered her into his arms with exquisite gentleness, as if she had suddenly become fragile as spun glass. "A baby," he repeated in wonder. "Our child." "The first of several, I hope," Lillian said, laughing through her tears. Yates kissed her then, pouring all his love and gratitude into the gesture. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "A wife, a child, a future worth building. After the war, after Cheyenne. I thought those possibilities were closed to me forever. And I thought I was alone in the world," Lillian reminded him. "Unwanted and unloved." "Never that," Yates vowed fiercely. "Never unwanted or unloved, not while I draw breath." They sat in companionable silence as the last rays of sunlight faded and the first stars appeared. Lillian rested her head against her husband's shoulder, contentment filling her like gentle rain soaking parched earth. "I was thinking," she said after a while, "about names." Yates chuckled. "A bit early for that, isn't it? Perhaps," she conceded. "But I was considering William for a boy after my father." "William Edwards," Yates tested the name. "It has a good sound, and for a girl," Lillian smiled. "Elizabeth, after your mother, we could call her Beth." "Beth Edwards," Yates nodded approvingly. "I like that very much." As darkness settled fully around them, bringing the cool night air of the high desert, they reluctantly rose to go inside. But at the doorway, Yates paused, turning to look back at the night sky with its canopy of brilliant stars. "What is it?" Lillian asked, following his gaze upward. "I was just thinking about that storm," he replied quietly. "How something so violent and destructive brought me the greatest gifts of my life." Lillian slipped her arms around his waist, leaning into his solid strength. "My father used to say that God works in mysterious ways." "Not so mysterious in this case," Yates countered, looking down at her with love shining in his eyes. "I think he knew exactly what he was doing when he sent that storm, and when he guided my horse to Cottonwood Creek at exactly the right moment. Then we should be grateful for the storm," Lillian concluded, "and for all that followed." "For everything that followed," Yates agreed, bending to claim her lips in a tender kiss that held the promise of all their tomorrows. Every single blessed day. December brought the birth of their son, William Yates Edwards, a healthy, robust boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Though the delivery was long and difficult, Lillian emerged from the ordeal tired but triumphant, cradling her newborn with a look of such profound love that it brought tears to Yates's eyes. "He's perfect," Yates whispered, carefully taking the swaddled infant from his wife's arms. "Absolutely perfect." Martha, who had assisted the doctor throughout the birth, beamed with grandmotherly pride. "Strong lungs on that one," she observed as little William let out a lusty cry. "He'll be keeping you both awake for months to come." "I don't mind," Lillian said, her exhaustion evident but her happiness undimmed. "Every cry is a blessing." As the years passed, the Double E flourished, as did the Edwards family. Beth arrived 2 years after her brother, a sunny-natured little girl who wrapped her father around her finger from her first smile. 2 more sons followed, James and Thomas, completing their family. Lillian's stepmother and her husband were eventually located in California, where they faced legal consequences for their actions. Eleanor served a brief jail sentence for fraud, while Blackburn received a longer term for his role in the deception, and for other crimes discovered during the investigation. Jacob Blackburn remained at the Double E, eventually becoming the ranch foreman when his natural leadership abilities emerged. He married a local girl and built a small house on the property, starting a family of his own. On the 10th anniversary of the storm that had changed their lives, Yates and Lillian rode together to Cottonwood Creek. The children were at home with Martha, giving the couple a rare day to themselves. It was a crisp November day, the sky the deep blue that comes only in the high desert autumn, the creek running clear and peaceful between its banks. "Hard to imagine it raging the way it was that night," Lillian commented as they dismounted near the spot where Yates had found her. "Nature can change its face in an instant," Yates replied, taking her hand as they walked along the bank. "Much like life itself." Lillian looked up at her husband, noting the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples, the laugh lines deepening around his eyes. 10 years had only made him more handsome in her estimation, adding character to his strong features. "Any regrets?" she asked softly, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it nonetheless. Yates stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "About marrying the woman I pulled half-drowned from a creek, about the 4 beautiful children she's given me, about the decade of happiness we've shared." He shook his head, smiling. "Not a single one." Lillian rose on tiptoe to kiss him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Nor I," she assured him, "though sometimes I wonder." "Wonder what?" "What would have happened if I'd taken the left fork in the road that night instead of the right?" she mused. "Would we ever have met? Would you have found someone else to love? Would I, Yates considered her question seriously. "I believe we would have found each other eventually," he said after a moment. "Some things are meant to be, storm or no storm." "Such a romantic," Lillian teased, though his words warmed her heart. "Only with you," he countered, pulling her close. "Only ever with you." They stood together by the creek that had nearly claimed her life and instead had led her to love, their embraced silhouettes outlined against the setting sun. Behind them lay a decade of shared joys and sorrows, challenges met and overcome together. Before them stretched the promise of many more years watching their children grow, welcoming grandchildren, growing old side by side. All because a desperate young woman had chosen the right fork in a storm-swept road, and a lonely rancher had decided to check his fence line despite threatening weather. "Take me home, Yates," Lillian said softly. "The children will be waiting." Hand in hand, they mounted their horses and rode toward the Double E, toward the life they had built from the wreckage of that long-ago storm, a life filled with love, laughter, and the quiet certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, just as they always had. And in the gentle evening light, as the ranch house came into view with smoke curling invitingly from its chimney, Lillian offered a silent prayer of gratitude for storms that destroy and then rebuild, for closed doors that force new paths, and most of all, for the man riding beside her, the cowboy who had found her soaked and brought her home.